Our next guest is among a growing number of thoughtful individuals taking on the task of leading diversity initiatives in major organizations. Dionne Mack is the Chief Diversity Officer of the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, an international organization that certifies skilled coaches. She is a seasoned executive and HR specialist who has spent 25 years integrating her skills and knowledge throughout highly complex multinational corporations. You are watching Profonde TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
Dionne, it is a pleasure to have you on the program. How are you?
I am doing very well, thank you. And it is my honor to be here with you, Phyllis. So thank you so much for the time and the invitation in the space.
From my perspective, anyone doing the diversity work is really on the front lines of our world right now. People think it's just a corporate endeavor, a new title, but I know from experience that it's a challenging job. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. And I would say of course it depends on who's in the job and where are they in the job. But I know for me, for example, at IPEC, I became familiar with IPEC first as a student. And in that time frame, when I was a student, there was the whole eruption of the pandemic and then the George Floyd murder and all that came from that. And so as a result of that, I started doing some work with the CEO at IPAC when she learned that, I have a background in D&I. And I joined the organization as Chief Diversity Officer. So, that was May or so of last year, right? I joined as Chief Diversity Officer in March of this year. And even in having those conversations, I had to highlight, look, this is a whole lot more than just someone who has the title of Chief Diversity Officer and we talk about diversity, or what do we do to make sure that our curriculum is inclusive? So for me in this role, it is very, holistic in the sense that there's the thought, around IPEC's position as an inclusive organization overall. So as an employer, what are we doing to examine and be intentional about creating an inclusive work environment, about ensuring that all of our employees and workers, and I'm using that term intentionally because it's not just about who's on our payroll as a W-2 employee, but also, our independent contractors, different partners that we engage with, ensuring that they have a positive work experience, right? Integrating strategies into how do we enhance the diversity of our teams? How do we ensure that there's equity in the overall employee experience? And then to make sure that we're leading in a way where it honors the humanity of everyone that we're engaging with. So that's from the employer perspective. That's just one element of it. Then we're a coach training institution. So what are we doing to ensure that we're training up culturally conscious and agile coaches? So looking at our curriculum on a regular basis and all of the other learning offerings that we have. Then there is the IPED community, which is about 25,000 people deep, all of our graduates and current students and prospective students. So are we engaging with everyone? Does everyone see a place and space for themselves? Are we recognizing, celebrating, and leveraging the vast diversity of our community? There's that, and then are we doing it in a way where everyone sees a space for themselves and for the different identities that they hold dear, right? And then there's the coaching industry overall and thinking about equity and access and inclusion and relevance. So to me, that Chief Diversity Officer role is thinking about all of those things all the time. I don't know if there's enough hours in a day, but it's a lot.
It's an enormous job that you've taken on as Chief Diversity Officer. I want to take a finer point to the question I'm asking, which
Mhm.
is that in the day-to-day work, and not necessarily just with IPAC, the diversity officer is a person. The
Mhm.
diversity officer herself or has to face the issues as well.
Mhm.
So is that in any way challenging? Do you have to hold back, reduce your viewpoints, shy away from controversial issues? How
Mhm.
do you gauge what's the way you are going to operate as the officer in the
Mhm.
organization?
That's a great question. And I have to say, so traditionally, yes, I have had to, and I think there's always an element of balance of, there's Dion, the Black woman, and then there's Dion, the employee of IPEC and representative of this organization. And I want to be as authentic to who I am, but we all know there's a time and a place for everything. I will say, though, that I have found being at IPEC, they're an organization whose mission is to raise the consciousness of the world, one person at a time. So everything about who they are and what they do is around awareness of our energy, of everyone and everything's interconnectedness. So I don't have to shy away from the difficult conversations. In fact, I find myself having conversations and I walk away from them and say, did I just say that? What in the world did I just do? Am I about to get fired? Because I just said some very out there things. They welcome those conversations and then we think about them and we examine them. So um,
That's
I
powerful.
don't know that that comes true in every organization, right? When I worked in other industries, I absolutely had to say, okay, Dion, change takes time. Everyone's in a different place. You have to meet folks where they are. Is this a work appropriate conversation? And to me, sometimes I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely it is, because work is comprised of people, and these are things that are impacting people. Yeah, but is it gonna derail the work? And so I don't find that I have those conversations, those thoughts, or those barriers as much being in IPEC, but that's not your typical organization for sure.
Your organization represents thousands of coaches, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Has the industry of coaching gotten more acceptance and more widespread usage in your view?
Coaching is one of the fastest growing industries in the world right now, for sure. And I think that that is an awesome thing, right? It's the whole intention of coaching is to help people come to realize their fullest potential, right? So that within itself is amazing. And I love the growth. It's also an unregulated industry right now. Um, and so when you say coach, I can wake up today and just say, well, I think I have a great knack for helping people to give them good advice and what have you. So I'm going to put a shingle out and I'm a coach. Um, and I'm not knocking that for sure. I would say though that, and it's an industry like any other health related or well-being industry, there's a natural or inherent penchant towards service to others, which is beautiful. At the same time, though, it's just like when you think about healthcare, there are barriers to inclusion, right? Um, or there's ways in which bias shows up in healthcare that if you're not intentional about, there's a disservice to the patient or the client. So there's importance for us as a coach training institution to ensure that we're being very intentional around bringing awareness to the importance of difference and otherism and how that may impact your clients or your patients, if you will. And so if you don't have that awareness, then it may impact the way that you coach your clients and impact how well they may realize breakthroughs and ahas and come to their greatest potential.
So your organization is devoted to also in offering training and guidance to become a coach or be a certified coach under IPEC.
Mm-hmm.
You are committed to including the diversity wisdom into the curriculum so that coaches have this understanding of these microaggressions and forms of discrimination and unconscious bias that exists in the health field and in lots of fields. So
Absolutely.
this is a daunting task, but not all sides, the word diversity is really difficult for me because I did diversity training for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the word diversity has gotten a kind of overusage and people misunderstand it. And so, there are different approaches to it.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe your approach and how would you see a curriculum emerging from your perspective to be inclusive and engaging?
Sure. So to me, there's a both and there's a delicate balance. To me, diversity is about difference, and it's about whatever difference matters. Now, we know that the term has evolved and came into place as a euphemism for strategies, particularly focused on race, gender, and in the last few, maybe 10 to 15 years, sexual orientation. And those are important major differences, but they're not the only differences that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it is about, how do you, from a coaching perspective, how do you train coaches who understand difference and how to manage difference and have an awareness of the impact that difference may have, whatever difference that is, on the way that you coach and on those that you're coaching. And at the same time, being aware that there is a global dominant culture or some global dominant cultures that have been centered in every aspect of society, and that there is an impact to everyone and everything around that dominant culture being centered. And so you can say, yes, diversity is about difference, diversity is about diversity of thought, and it's different experiences that bring diversity of thought. At the same time, there is this dominant culture that everything is centered around, and so we can't lose sight of that. So how do we talk about that and all other differences at the same time?
And also, since you're an international organization, you're dealing with different dominant cultures, so
Absolutely.
that you have societies where the women are just beginning to get a sense of their own freedom, and people with disabilities may not even have a voice in many places. So people have to have a fluid understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Am I reading you correctly?
That's exactly right. And you may not necessarily know everything about everything. No one has the capacity for all of that, but even having the awareness or the sensitivity to the fact that there are all of these differences. And so, when I go to engage with any client, I can walk in and say, I don't know everything about this person. I don't know everything about, all of their identities, but at least I'm aware that we probably do have different identities. And so keeping an ear and an eye open for that as we're engaging. Making time to learn about as many different cultures as I can. Again, I don't have to be an expert in any one of them, but recognizing that, for example, in the United States, you may hear the loudest, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets oiled, but in other cultures, the loudest duck is the one that gets shot. So, as I'm engaging with someone, being aware that their thought process may be different than mine. I may not know exactly what their thought process is, but I know that it may be different, so I'm going to explore differently.
Let's just switch gears for just a little bit. In a lot of organizations, a big problem that I see is that the diversity work comes in, gets done, but the CEOs and the senior execs don't necessarily do the work. How is it different at IPEC?
Absolutely. So, of course, as Chief Diversity Officer, I'm part of the C-suite, but our CEO and honestly everyone else on the C team is very, very involved, very hands-on, very committed. Inclusion and diversity aligns with who we are as an organization. One of the things that I'm proud of is that certainly when I came in the door, I looked at the curriculum and there were some things that we needed to change, more inclusive language. But when I looked at the overall approach, it's steeped in inclusion inherently, right? So there weren't any major changes that we needed to do. It was just, okay, let's tighten some things up. We can maybe beef up more here and there, but the CEO, we have conversations around diversity topics that I would never expect to have in a work environment. And then that trickles down into our overall approach from our processes, our policies. We have a diversity conversation in every leadership meeting. Most times, not intentionally, it just goes there. And we're really working hard to make it just become a part of who we are and what we do. So from the conversations that we've had in leadership meetings, it's now our Chief Academic Officer, for example, has said, I'm going to take these conversations to my faculty, and we're going to have these types of conversations. The operations and marketing team is doing the same thing. And that's because as a C-suite, we just have the conversations. Sometimes very unexpected and unconventional and pushing the envelope conversations. But I think that that's awesome.
So let's talk about Dionne Mack. Let's find out what really, not how you got to this work, because you've told the story of how you became the Chief Diversity Officer, what the journey was. But what drove you in your life to now end up in this field? What are the stories you can tell about your own life, your own experiences as a Black American living here now?
So, and I'll probably have to tell the story at a different time when we have more time. How I actually landed in the work was by chance, but not by chance. But diversity, inclusion, and equity work aligns with what I believe is my purpose. My family, particularly my paternal grandmother, was very, very involved civically, very involved with racial equity work and education. And I think I probably inherited that from her. So I've always had very strong feelings about equality, and particularly racial equality, and very specifically equality for Black Americans. I'll be honest about that. I mean, I feel it's important for everyone, but if I had to prioritize, I'm just going to be honest. Racial equality is very important to me. And so I started my career doing discrimination investigations in a government environment, and then went into D&I work in academia, and then just kind of progressed, went into corporate America, and have moved up in the D&I space. And it just aligns with who I am and with what's important to me. I want to make a difference in the world, and I think the greatest way to do that is by bringing more equality to everyone. And I've always felt like the greatest way of doing that, or to have the greatest impact, would be to do that in a corporate environment. I feel like if I can impact the work experience for 10 people, and if I can make 10 leaders more inclusive, they will create a better experience for their teams, and those team members will create it. Just kind of goes out exponentially based off of the web of everyone's connections. And then I came to IPEC, and I just feel even more hopeful about the work, because now I see, when I look at their philosophy and methodology, if I can bring that into corporate spaces and into the coaching industry, that just helps to raise the consciousness of the world. which is their mission, which aligns
That
with mine.
is, that's a genuine motivation that you have. That is, I think the sadness is that there are so many great people who still are experiencing doors closed, their ideas aren't getting heard. There's an enormous potential out there in the universe. So coaches, in my view, are well positioned to be the catalysts for change, because those people are the secret to our success as humanity. So every time a door is closed on someone, people don't get through, we're limiting the whole possible progress of the planet. That
Yes,
child who's in a wheelchair, whose wheelchair doesn't fit through the door, is being blocked. Her brilliance is being blocked. It's not just the wheelchair that's
mm-hmm.
being blocked. So this work takes on a whole dimension of not saving the world, of making the world a better place.
Yes,
So
yes.
we share that, Dion. But I'm still wanting to go a little bit further. So you talk about your grandmother. Um, my father and mother were both from the South, and they experienced a lot of discrimination. So they raised me with a real consciousness about the importance of voting and really standing up for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling you had a similar experience, that your grandmother instilled in you a consciousness, as you say,
Absolutely.
about the world. Did she herself have experiences that shaped her into who she was?
Oh, absolutely. I would say, and that holds true probably for all of my grandparents, but I was speaking specifically about my paternal grandmother. She was from the South, South Carolina, and you know, um, she started school late because they wanted to have all the her was her and her siblings and her cousins kind of a couple of years apart, but she was a little older, so it was like, well, you start school when the rest of them start school or what have you. um, and when she graduated high school, she wanted to go to college. She worked, it was interesting, she told me this story. She worked with, there were two white men, South Carolina, who had their own beauty school and beauty shop, and they took her under their wing, teaching her like the chemistry side of it and how do you make the different products and what have you. And she worked with them to pay for her way through school. So her undergrad, her grad, and she went as far as ABD.
ABD, all but
All but
degree.
her dissertation, yes, working on her PhD. She went as far as everything but her dissertation. And she worked in education, so she was the head of the science department in the school that she worked in. And
Wow.
because she was the first Black teacher in her county, with integrated classrooms. And so she talked about all of that with me. And she was very committed to uplifting the Black community, but also recognizing that you have to work with others in order to do that. And I try to make sure that I bring that to the work. While on one hand, and it depends on who you are and what day you happen to run into me, but sometimes you might look at me and think, well, she's just totally focused on, her, Dion's focused on her community or her identities. But I know that we are all one and we all are all connected, and we didn't get here by ourselves, and we're not going to get to the ideal state by ourselves either.
Well, thank you, Dion, for a very fine look into IPEC and into your mission. I deeply appreciate the time with you, and I look forward to future conversations with you. Thank you so much.